New for September on BBC1, Jimmy McGovern's drama of love and death.
There are only two things you can do in a little village in the Lake District. One's drink, the other's sex.
Warren Clarke stars as the locksmith.
I'm the #1 suspect. I can't tell you what it's like being accused.
Madness or teenage rebellions.
An evil, wicked streak in you and Devonshire.
Michael PALIN travels the Pacific in full circle.
It's a truly amazing place. I haven't seen as much steam since I gave up train spotting.
The antiques inspectors visit an attic near you. And what they want are little treasures.
We should think about starting a family.
What? A fatherly role for George Cole.
He's in the shed. He's not omnipresent.
Hello.
There's football both off the pitch
I'm just an ordinary lad who loves his mum and dad.
and on as Liverpool kick off in Europe. New dramas for favourite faces. September on BBC1.
The date is set, isn't it?
As you've never seen her before, Ulrika Johnson on BBC2 in a few moments, comedy in the pink. Mad about football, Danny Baker recalls the action from 12 years ago. Match of the 80s here on BBC1 in 20 minutes. The news now on BBC1 with Michael Buerk.
The husband in the Lady in the Lake case was charged tonight with murdering his wife 21 years ago. He'll appear in court tomorrow. Another crisis on Mere, confusion tonight after reports its oxygen system's broken down. And William Hague has a party conference at the Notting Hill Carnival. Good evening. Police investigating the so-called Lady in the Lake case tonight charged Gordon Park with murder. The body of his first wife, Carol, was found by divers in Coniston Water earlier this month, 21 years after she disappeared. Mr. Park, a retired schoolteacher, was arrested yesterday when he returned from holiday. He'll appear in court tomorrow. Richard Wells reports.
For 2 days and a night, the husband of the woman known as the Lady in the Lake had been detained at Barrow Police Station. He'd faced hours of questioning by detectives about the disappearance and murder of his former wife. Then, shortly before 8:30 this evening, police issued a brief statement.
At 8:10 this evening, a man was charged with the murder of Carol Ann Park. He will appear before Barrow magistrates tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. and I can confirm that that man is Gordon Park.
Gordon Park is 53 years old and retired as a teacher in 1994. He'd returned to the family home in Barrow with his current wife on Saturday after a cycling holiday in France. His arrest followed just hours later. Carol Park was a 30-year-old primary school teacher when she disappeared from her home in the Cumbrian village of Lees in July 1976. She was reported missing after Mr. Park and their 3 children had gone on a day trip to Blackpool. Her body, wrapped in a sack and weighted down, was found at the bottom of Coniston Water by divers almost 2 weeks ago. Her identity was revealed only on Friday after forensic scientists reconstructed her jaw, mouth and teeth from decomposed remains. 36 hours had elapsed since Mr. Park was arrested, and the warrant which allowed him to be detained had only minutes left to run. At that point, he would either have to have been charged or released. He was charged. Richard Wells, BBC News, Barrow-in-Furness.
There's confusion tonight over what's happening on board the Mir space station. In the United States, the American space agency NASA says that Mir's primary and backup oxygen generators have broken down. But in Russia, Mission Control says there are no problems. From Washington, Bill Turnbull.
Just when things seem to be getting better on Mir, there are more problems on the Russian space station, problems which could jeopardize the whole mission. The trouble this time is with the oxygen generators, without which the cosmonauts cannot remain in space for long. The main system, known as the electron generator, began overheating and shut itself down. Then it seems the secondary system also failed. The crew were still attempting to fix it when the space station ended its communications for the day. NASA, playing down any potential danger, said the problem could be fixed quickly.
This is not an immediate, urgent situation. This is a standard of kind of what's become the usual thing in the last few weeks, that something for them to work on when they get up tomorrow.
The oxygen generators have been a persistent problem on board Mir. The electron system had been switched off for days in an effort to save power on board before last week's repair mission. The backup, in which solid fuel canisters are ignited to produce oxygen, almost caused a catastrophe 6 months ago when one canister burst into flames and filled the space station with smoke. There are still 2 days' supply of oxygen in store on Mir, but mission control outside Moscow has denied there is any problem. A spokesman said the crew had reconnected electrons successfully and gone to sleep. Bill Turnbull, BBC News, Washington.
The former Irish Prime Minister, Charles Haughey, is facing prosecution tonight after the publication of a report into payments to politicians. Last month, he finally admitted accepting more than £1 million from an Irish supermarket tycoon. Previously, he denied receiving any money. The report has now been sent to the Director of Public Prosecutions. Leo Enright reports from Dublin.
Charles Haughey was jeered as he left the tribunal last month, but he still seemed proud. Now comes the fall. He faces a possible 2-year jail sentence and a £10,000 fine just for the way he treated the tribunal. And there will be a tax investigation that could ruin him. The current Prime Minister, BERTIE AHERN, said he was deeply dismayed by actions which he said were indefensible and disgraceful.
The acts, unfortunately, that he is found guilty of in this report are very serious matters, and I think they will be followed through. I think both through the Revenue Commissioners, the DPP, and the party take a dim view on him as well.
Charles Haughey gave evidence under oath. The tribunal report suggests that he lied 11 times. The man who shared power with him in the last government believes the former Premier could go to jail.
If the Director of Public Prosecutions decides to prosecute him, and if he's convicted, of course, it is possible that he would get a jail sentence.
Charles Haughey has spent recent weeks sailing on his private yacht. His lavish lifestyle was supported in part by the bizarre charity of businessman Ben Dunn, described by the judge as an impetuously generous person. The Deputy Prime Minister wants to know who else was generous.
We need to find out who these people were. I'm sure they weren't all as benign as Mr. Dunn. He does say that Mr. Dunn's behaviour was bizarre. If other people were supporting this lavish lifestyle over a long period of time, we have to know who they are and why they were doing it, and did they get any benefits in return.
This 112-page report does not even come close to ending the controversy over political payments in Ireland. The new Irish Prime Minister faces an enormous challenge, and as he said himself, the good name of Ireland is at stake. Leo Enright, BBC News, Dublin.
The former East German leader Egon Krenz has been convicted of the manslaughter of 4 people shot dead as they tried to cross the Berlin Wall. He was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison. From Berlin, Caroline WYATT reports.
Jostled by the waiting crowds, East Germany's last hardline communist leader, Egon Krenz, arrived for the verdict from a court which he insisted had no right to try him. Mr. Krenz and 2 other senior members of the Politburo have spent the last year and a half inside this courtroom, defending themselves against what Mr. Krenz termed victor's justice by the West. As the judges entered, cameramen and photographers were asked to leave the courtroom so the verdict could be announced. Mr. Krenz was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison for his part in the killings of those trying to flee to freedom in the West.
We're going to appeal against this verdict, and we believe that it's wrong. Krenz should not be put in jail. He did big things and very good things in autumn '89. He wasn't charged. There was no bloodshed at all. And we think it's just incredible to send Egon Krenz 6 years to jail.
This trial closes a bitter period of German history. Altogether, more than 800 people were killed while trying to escape East Germany. Mr. Krenz's argument that he and his colleagues could do nothing to prevent those deaths without the agreement of Moscow was one rejected by the court.
Völlig ungenügend, also ich hätte auf lebenslänglich plädiert.
Ronald Heppner, who was shot and wounded while trying to flee communist East Germany, said Mr. Krenz was lucky to avoid a life sentence. The defendants and their lawyers had argued that this Berlin courtroom was no place to battle out the complexities of Germany's Cold War past. However, for most Germans, this verdict is a vindication for the victims of the Berlin Wall and a just indictment of a brutal regime. Caroline WYATT, BBC News, Berlin.
The tobacco industry in the United States has reached an out-of-court settlement with the state of Florida, thought to be worth more than $11 billion. It comes days after 2 tobacco executives admitted that cigarettes could have killed 100,000 Americans. The money will go towards the cost of treating people with diseases caused by smoking. Stephen Sacker reports.
The jury trial of the state of Florida et al. Versus the American Tobacco Company et al. Has been settled.
A milestone in the American campaign against the big tobacco companies. Faced with an embarrassing trial in Florida, the cigarette giants paid up to the tune of $11 billion. There'll be new controls on advertising and disclosure of damaging documents about the dangers of cigarettes.
This time, indeed, the people have won. The tobacco industry has conceded defeat, and we have a settlement of historic proportions.
Having admitted that cigarettes can be directly linked with cancer and death, the manufacturers are on the defensive. Their multi-billion-dollar industry faces a series of legal suits. Concern about teen smoking is at the heart of the anti-tobacco campaign. Though overall smoking levels have declined, amongst youngsters, the habit is spreading. Tobacco is a profits-rich industry. The companies are ready to make a national settlement of $360 billion over 25 years to protect their future business. Congress and the President are expected to make a decision on a nationwide settlement with big tobacco next month. For the tobacco companies, worried about the potentially crippling costs of litigation, a deal can't come soon enough. Stephen Sacker, BBC News, Washington.
Here, Downing Street has set up a new Whitehall action group to coordinate help for the people of Montserrat, who've been made homeless by a volcano. On the island, the evacuation has been continuing, though it seems that most people are determined to stay, ignoring warnings of another dangerous eruption. Among those leaving are a British couple who have lived and worked in Montserrat for many years.
For these British expatriates, the dream is over. Barbara and Christopher CROWE are packing up and getting out of Montserrat, their lives utterly ruined by its volcano. The CROWES have been forced to abandon their arts and craft business and 3 other properties that all lie in the volcano danger zone.
Frankly, we're leaving behind everything that we've worked for 37 years. We're leaving behind a condo, which we rented out, a house and a cottage, which we rented out, and a nice little business. It's not as though they're covered in volcanic ash or anything. They're just sitting there in a zone which is considered to be unsafe and that we are no longer allowed to go to.
Mr. and Mrs. CROWE told me they now have to start their lives all over again to find a new country and a new way to earn a living.
We've always said we would never ever find anything like this anywhere else. We would be very, very lucky to find anything like this. So we are very, very sad indeed. But we have to look forward. We can't keep looking back. Unfortunately, we're at the wrong time of life to do this sort of thing. I mean, if we were 20 years younger, it would be a lot easier.
They curse the volcano that has succeeded in forcing them out where hurricanes have failed, and they know its eruptions could soon engulf the property in which they've invested everything. For all the islanders, rich or poor, black or white, the decision on whether to leave has been an agonizing one. And as Barbara and Christopher CROWE set sail today from this, their island paradise, they did so knowing they may never return. Ben Brown, BBC News, Montserrat.
Police in Norfolk, searching for the killer of the schoolboy Thomas Marshall, say their investigation's getting a good response. They put on show a mountain bike similar to Thomas's in the hope that someone may remember seeing him after he left home in Haysborough on Thursday evening. There's to be a major independent inquiry into Britain's drug laws. The investigation, set up by a charitable body, the Police Foundation, will last 2 years and be carried out by a committee made up of leading lawyers, police officers and drugs experts. The aim is to assess whether the current legislation is working properly. Paul Newman reports.
The Castle Craig Drug Clinic near Edinburgh specialises in the treatment of those suffering from alcohol and drug dependency. 350 patients are undergoing rehabilitation, and the ease of access to drugs on the streets is made all too clear by recovering addicts.
Nowadays it's so easy to get drugs. You can get them in every street corner. You can get them more or less 100 yards from your house, anytime.
The inquiry into drugs legislation will focus on whether the law needs to be changed in the light of a growing drugs culture, a culture often associated with the rave scene. In the 25 years since the Misuse of Drugs Act came into force, there have been big changes in social attitudes towards drugs use, but leading specialists are divided about the wisdom of any decriminalisation.
For cannabis, then we should be looking at the kind of measures they've adopted in Holland, but ultimately perhaps full legalisation, licensing and control of that drug. For heroin, for example, then we could be looking at developing much more flexible prescribing programmes than exist at the moment.
I guess if you're an overworked police officer, the idea of decriminalising cannabis potentially might have some appeal. I seriously doubt whether decriminalising cannabis would have any impact whatsoever on the extent of the problem.
Earlier this month, one MP called for a royal commission on drug abuse after a 5-year-old boy was shot dead in Bolton in an attack apparently related to drugs. But in response to the new study, the government's giving no undertaking to act on the committee's conclusions.
The inquiry team will take about 2 years to complete its review. Its recommendations will help clarify the way forward for tackling the misuse of drugs. Paul Newman, BBC News, Westminster.
Football and Blackburn Rovers have extended their lead at the top of the FA Carling Premiership by thrashing Sheffield Wednesday 7-2. Blackburn scored 5 goals in the opening 24 minutes of the match at Ewood Park, with the Scottish international Kevin Gallagher scoring twice.
Well, it seems every time.
Chris Sutton also scored twice for Blackburn. He's now hit 5 goals in only 4 matches this season. Tennis, and Britain's new #1, Greg Rusedski, has made a successful start at the US Open at Flushing Meadow in New York. Rusedski, who's now ranked 20th in the world, continued his recent good form by beating the American David Wheaton 6-2, 6-3, 6-3 in the first round of the tournament. Tim Henman is due to play 5th seed Thomas Muster in his first round match. More than 1 million people have been enjoying the final day of the Notting Hill Carnival, which police say is on course to be the most peaceful on record. Among those joining in was the Conservative leader William Hague, who said politicians needed to get out and about more. Duncan Kennedy reports.
To the pulsating beat of 100 bands, Carnival 97 lived up to its reputation as a place where extravagance comes as standard. Some came on 2 legs, others came on 4. Whatever the number, it was hard to keep them still, with 1 million revellers and 80 sound systems to dance to. Among those enjoying the spectacle was the Conservative Party leader, insisting he wasn't here to boost his appeal to the young.
Well, I've just come to see what happens here at the Carnival. It's the biggest cultural event in the nation. I think politicians ought to be out and about here.
Police made less than a dozen arrests all day, the majority involving drugs. A number of people were taken to hospital tonight after a crush at a Radio 1 concert, but it's not thought anyone was seriously hurt. Apart from the Radio 1 incident, police have reported few problems today. Officers are now anticipating that revellers will round off the end of a spectacular day with an orderly departure home. Duncan Kennedy, BBC News, at the Notting Hill Carnival.
And the main news again tonight, police investigating the so-called Lady in the Lake case tonight charged Gordon Park with murder. The body of his first wife, Carol, was found by divers in Coniston Water earlier this month, 21 years after she disappeared. That's all from the BBC Newsroom tonight. Good night.
BBC One, the latest news from South today.
Good evening. A 39-year-old man has been charged in connection with the death of a woman who was fatally stabbed during a knife attack on the outskirts of Newbury in Berkshire. The man has also been charged with the attempted murder of the woman's elderly parents. Officers have found a kitchen knife which may have been used in last night's attack. James Trollope reports.
An outburst of violence in a neighbourhood which prides itself on its peace and privacy. 47-year-old Ruth Remain was stabbed to death in a smart, secluded house which she shared with her elderly parents and husband in Washwater near Newbury. She was dead before she could be admitted to hospital. Her parents, who also suffered knife wounds, survived the attack, which has appalled local residents.
I'm really quite shocked, really. As I say, you usually think these things to happen in a sort of more of a rough area, but not in something like this. But who knows what makes people do these sort of things?
Mrs. Remain's father, 72-year-old John Deakin, needed emergency surgery at a hospital in Basingstoke, where his wife Gladys, aged 73, was treated for minor injuries. At Newbury, police have been questioning a man believed to be Mrs. Remain's 39-year-old husband, Chris. It's understood a kitchen knife, which may have been used in the attack, was found at the scene.
Safety experts want to know why 2 children were struck by fireworks as they stood 300 feet from a public display. The accident happened at the end of a torchlight procession through Bognor Regis late last night. Chris Ware reports.
The firework display at the end of the pier last night ended with what witnesses described as an unintentional explosion. 7 people among the crowd of over 1,000 lining the seafront were peppered with fireworks. 1 girl was hit in the chest and another in the legs.
5 fireworks sort of just suddenly went off all at the same time, big ones, and they just came towards the audience and just sort of exploded in the audience.
Some people were critical of the lack of ambulance cover and the time it took to get the victims to hospital.
I saw her, she had burns all over her chest. It hit her on the chest, she'd torn the clothing off and she burned her hand in tearing the clothing off.
2 girls aged 9 and 12 who both live in the town are still being treated for burns at St Richard's Hospital in Chichester. 36 hours after the accident, AHERN Council's due to start a full inquiry into what happened tomorrow morning.
Rail travellers in the south should find their